Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and this amazing video. I'm Aditya. In this video, we will see how we can create a simple Express CRUD GraphQL API. So without any further ado, let's begin. Okay, let's first understand what is GraphQL. So GraphQL, as the name suggests, it's a query language for APIs or for writing APIs. Now, generally we have our traditional REST API where we have get request, post request, put, delete, all those requests. And we generally make requests based on our the resources we want or the resource we want to create on the database. Now let's take a very simple example. Okay. In this case, we have a users table and we have a to-dos table. Let's say I want to display only title of the to-dos. Okay. But somehow our API returns the description as well. So in this case, I only wanted the title, but now the API is also returning the description. So some unnecessary data or most of the unnecessary data is being sent from the server. And it's just that I have to either modify the server code or I have to do certain things so that I will only get title. In REST APIs, how it works is like whatever you write in the server code, you get it as it is. Now, another example is, let's say in user's case, we want only certain parameters from the user and we want the list of to-dos as well. Now, generally how it works is you make an API request for users, then you need to make another API request to get the to-dos. But somehow, like you can also send the to-dos with the user, but you will be sending unnecessary data, even that is being not asked. So how can we have this manipulation where we can get resources or we can post resources with as minimum requests as possible, as well as we only get data that we ask for and we don't have to modify much of the server side code? Well, that's where GraphQL comes in picture. So with GraphQL, you can ask for specific parameters from your models or from your data or specific keys from your data, or you can also have it done in as minimum requests as possible, maybe one request or maximum two requests, or generally it's one request most probably, but sometimes you might need to do two, but as minimum requests as possible. So that's the basics of GraphQL, and that's the pros over REST APIs or traditional REST approach. Now, the cons here are that, of course, you need to write some extra configurations. It's not that straightforward. Also, when it comes to testing, with REST API, you can simply test with browser or Postman. But with GraphQL, you need certain tools to test it. And also from the client side, you need to make certain configuration to make it work properly. So there are pros and cons, but pros somehow outweighs the cons. That's why it's being used a lot. So that's actually the basic of GraphQL. Now, if you notice here, like in the GraphQL, it's on an open source project, by the way. So there are you can use it in almost every language. As you could see, there are language support. It's like almost every language. Now here, specifically for Node.js or JavaScript, you'll see there are tons of libraries. There is GraphQL.js, there's Apollo server, Express GraphQL. We'll be using, by the way, this Express GraphQL. Now let's understand what these libraries do, because every library has its own way of writing the GraphQL server and also writing the certain components for your GraphQL API. But what matters here is the basic understanding of these components, because these components, once you understand this, then you can write GraphQL APIs in almost any programming language. So let's understand these components. So let's try to compare it with our REST API, so it's become very easy. Now, generally in our REST API approach, in this case, our Express API, we will have something like app.get, which will be the get request, let's say for getting the list of users. And then we will send, there will be a function, some function, which will be sending the list of users, something like that. Then we will also have something like, let's say app.get, there will be to-dos, we'll be sending list of to-dos, and so on and so on. So whatever these get requests we use in REST API, consider query from GraphQL very similar to this get request in REST API. The only difference being, in query, we can specify what data we want for each query, and we can specify what data we want to hide or so on. So in other words, it's just like what data we want. So query in GraphQL, they are nothing but functions which returns data. So they are very similar to get requests. Now, what about the post request? What if we want to, let's say, create a new user or update a user. So in that case, we have here put and post request. In GraphQL, we have mutations. So mutations, they are functions which act very similar to post requests, where you can create a user, where you can, let's say, update a user or update certain resources. So you can do many things with those mutations. Now, one thing to notice here is we only have query and mutations. So how does these club together, or how does these two things work together? So that's where we have schema. So in GraphQL, we have a schema which is a combination of mutations and query, and each mutation, in this case, let's say we have a mutation to create a user, so that will be a function. So each mutation and a query, let's say in query we have a function to get a user, so these two will have their resolvers. They are nothing but the functions only. So now in theoretical approach, it won't make much of sense, but as we start typing our code, you will see like how these pieces of puzzles club together and make like a beautiful picture of GraphQL API. So let's begin with understanding what we have from the Express side. We have the to-do model, user model, which is a simple Sequelize model. I have created an API, Express API video with Sequelize. So if you haven't checked that playlist, please do check that playlist as well. There we have seen all these concepts of Sequelize and how we can initialize the database and all those things. So we have these two models and we'll be using this. Suffice to say that user has many to-do, so it's like one-to-many relationship. Now, to begin with, we can either structure our code properly so that everything is organized, or we can have everything written in index.js. So let's try to organize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder here as GraphQL, because you can have REST API and GraphQL side by side in your Express API. So for that, for a purpose, let's create here a GraphQL folder. Now here we will have all the logic of our GraphQL API related things. So as the name suggests, graph again. So try to imagine there will be nodes. So one node will be a user node. There will be a to-do node. So these are like two nodes. And again, they will have their own set of nodes. So it's going to be like a proper graph type structure. So what we create here is we'll create another folder, which will be user. And there will be another folder, which will be to-do. Okay. Now what we will have inside this user and to-do folder? Well, let's start with the user folder, because we need to start by writing a mutation for a user in which we will be creating a user, and we will then go for to do by writing query and mutation for to do. Okay, so again, the structure doesn't matter. What matters is the concept. So let's try with this user first. So here I'm going to write the mutations. So all the mutations for the user will come inside this mutations file. Then we will have another file which will be query. Then we will have mutation we had. Then we will have something known as type definitions. So we'll call it typedef.js. Okay, now let's understand how these things club together. Going back to the concept of GraphQL, you only get what you ask for. Okay, so in this case, if I see my database, which I have already created, so make sure you have created that, otherwise the tables won't migrate. Now, in this case, for the users table, what can I ask for? I can ask for ID, I can ask for first name, password, last name, email, created at, updated at, and as I have relationship over here between users and to-dos, so I can also ask for to-dos, like the list of to-dos, and that will be again ID, title, description, created at, updated at, and so on, and like user ID associated with it. Now, that means here we just need to define the schema of what data could be sent back. Okay, so let's redefine that schema over here. So I'm going to call this const user type. Now this is going to be a GraphQL object. So let's import this GraphQL object that's going to come from our GraphQL package. Now we need to install these packages. So what I'm going to do is I'll go over here. And we need to install this GraphQL package. We also need to install Express GraphQL, because that's what we are going to use. And we need to install BigCrypt. So I'm here going to say Express GraphQL. Then we will need GraphQL and BigCrypt. Just to BigCrypt will be just used to hash our password. So as this is installing behind the scene, okay, spelling it should be BigCrypt. Sorry for that, I was saying BigCrypt for some reason. So BigCrypt, and this should install the packages. There we go. Then we have npm run start, starting the node server again. There we go. Let's go back over here. Now user type. Now here what we need is GraphQL object type. Now this is going to be an object which is of type GraphQL, so it's going to be a GraphQL object. Now here what we need to specify is first the name for this. So here I'm going to call this user because this relates to our user table. Now if you notice, we have one schema for our users database table and other schema we will have it for our GraphQL API related to user. Okay, so next, okay, we have fields. So what will be these fields? These fields will be all the columns or all the keys or all the things that you want to send, or you want like have a range of set that user can ask from. So here user can ask for ID, which is going to be of type int, because in our case we have it as a auto increment ID. So I'm going to include this from GraphQL int. Then we will have the first name, which is going to be GraphQL string type. So I'm going to include this as well. Then we will have the last name. Then we will have the email. Then we will have the password. Then we will have, in case if we want to send the to-dos as well. So we will have here to-dos. And for the to-dos, we will get back to this once we define our to-dos inside our type definition of to-dos. Now, in this case, if you notice, I'm sending the password as well. If I want, I can hide it because generally you don't send the password to the user. Yes, because it's only for the input, it's not for the output. So we can hide it over here. So in this case, if the user tries to ask for password, they will never get it. Now, here we have the to-dos. Now, in this case, we just need to, let's first export this. So modules.exports user type. That's great. Now let's quickly write the to-dos type as well. So what we are going to do is we'll go inside the to-do. Here we will create a new file, type def.js, so type definition for to-dos. Now here, same logic, nothing different. We just need to, like, we can simply like literally just copy from here and change few things over here. So what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to call this as to-do type. Then I'm going to name this as to-do. It doesn't matter, you can name it anything. Also for the user, you can name it anything. Then what fields I can send? So field will be, so let's see, my to-do table, what do I have? I have title, description, and also these two timestamps, so which I'll need to add it in the user as well. But in the user, we don't need it, so we can add it for the to-do actually. So here I could say created at, and this will be updated at, if I'm typing it correctly. Oh, sorry, it's without. So it's created at, updated at, and then we have the description and title. So this will be our title. Then we can also copy this from here. We can put it over here. This will be description. And here we will have the user ID, which is again going to be of type GraphQL int. So let's paste it over here. So this becomes our to-do type. Now, in our case, we have a relationship where one user has many to-dos. So here I need to use GraphQL list type because it's going to be a list, GraphQL list. There we go. And here I need to put the type of to-do type because it's going to be a list of to-do type. Okay, let's import that. We haven't exporting it, that's why it's not able to import it. So let's export it from here, and then it could import it. There we go. Let's write here, this should be as to-dos, so that we can use it over here as to-dos as well. Where is that? Type def, let's put it as to-dos. Perfect. Okay, so this become our type definition for user GraphQL database, sorry, APIs, and this become for GraphQL API related to to-do. Now let's go to mutations. Okay, so inside mutations, what we'll have, all the functions that are related to creating a user, updating a user, and so on. So let's first write the basic mutation for creating a user. So this will be const create user. Okay, now we won't be writing it like this, it's going to be a bit different. So what we are going to do is we will tell it, okay, what this create user will return after the user is created. So I'm going to say type will be user type. So these will be the list of keys or features, or you could say, yeah, keys actually, or the columns that this user can return when the client ask, or from the client side is being asked. Then we will have, okay, arguments. Now let's understand what are these arguments. Okay, now with post request in traditional REST API, you have request.body where you can send the, inside the body you can send the details. Let's say in this case registering a user, you'll set first name, last name, email, password. But in GraphQL case, you have arguments which you can consider very similar to request.body, but they are passed in as a function as an arguments. Okay, so here we will need first name, we will also need the last name, we will need the email, we will need the password. So these are the basic GraphQL, or not, these are the GraphQL type actually, so GraphQL string, but these are the keys, or you could say the data we will need from the front end or from the client, whosoever makes request over Graph API or GraphQL API. Now we got the arguments. Now what? Okay, so this function is of, will return data which will be of user type. This function will, which means this create user function will accept arguments or accept data from the front end, which will be of this schema, which will be first name, last name, email, password, and this function will resolve. So this will be the logic actually of this function. You could say we can call this as resolve. This is going to be a async function, and inside this async function, so if I put this like this, let's remove this over here. So inside this async function, here you will see it has certain parameters. So it's a parent, arguments, context, and info. So context generally refers to the global data or the global context. So the context that are shared with all the mutations or queries, that refers to context. Arguments here refers to the arguments passed by the front end. So in this case, these details, first name, last name, email, password. Now first thing we need to do is we first need to hash our password. So here I'm going to say args.password. So that's going to be inside that. We need to hash it with bcrypt hash sync. We can get this. Okay, let's have it like this. Const bcrypt. Go to require bcrypt. And here, if you notice, I'm not using any validation, like we're checking whether email exits or not or what, but you can use Zord or Express validator to validate the email and password. So we won't go in that much depth for validation, but generally when you have these validation, let's try to see if we don't send one of these, what happens. But generally you can like write the validation here, and if the validation fails, then you can send an HTTP response of 422 like validation error and so on. Now in this case, okay, we create the password, then we just need to create the user. So what I'm going to do is, so as you could see, like from the context, we can get the user model, or we can straight away get the user model like this. We could say const user equal to await. Now first we need to connect to our database. So here I need to write await connect. That's going to come from dbconfig. And then after we connect, we need to create the user with whatever arguments are being passed. So this is going to come from models, and then we return the user. Okay, so this becomes our mutation. Now let's go to our express index.js, which is our Express API's entry point. Now here we need to activate or write the logic to listen to this GraphQL requests. Okay, so first thing we will need is we need to first get in the graph. We are using Express GraphQL, so we need to use GraphQL HTTP from that. So I'm going to write const GraphQL HTTP, get it from Express GraphQL, and once we got it, now we need to have the query and the mutation. So here I'm going to write const query, so that for now I'm gonna just keep it as a blank object. So here let's pass at the blank object, but later we'll convert it to something else. We'll also need GraphQL object graph, and here what we need to do is we need to write the mutation. Now this mutation will be our new GraphQL object, and then it will be like this. I guess I forgot one thing over here. Yeah, I put the new. That's great. Now then once we have this we need to give it a name, so it's going to be a mutation, and then there will be fields. So fields will be again, okay, what it's going to return. So this fields over here will be list of all the mutations. So in this case, what mutations we are going to have? We are going to have the mutations from to do. We are going to have the mutations from users. So in this case, let's export this mutation, something like this, modules dot exports, and let's export it as an object. So we can put all the mutations over here. Now, once we have those mutations, okay, let's import them. So here I'm going to say const user mutations. That will come from GraphQL user, their mutations. And here I will use the spread operator to spread my mutations, all the user mutations that we have written. Now we wrote the mutation, we just define a basic query object. Now next thing we need to do is we need to listen to this GraphQL request. So here I'm going to say app.use. That will be our GraphQL endpoint. We just have one endpoint in GraphQL API. We never have, like REST API, we never have more than one endpoint. It's always one endpoint. And then we will have here our GraphQL HTTP server that will come from Express GraphQL. And inside this, we need to pass the schema. So our schema will be GraphQL schema. So we also need to import this from GraphQL. And this will be our queries and mutations. So here I'm going to say, okay, my query refers to this query and my mutations refers to this mutation that I have defined here. Next, we need to like have that graphical user interface. So here, just to test our API, so here I'm going to say GraphQL, it's true. And once this is done, let's see if we have any errors over here. Okay, we have just one error. One of the buildings missing is okay. So for this query, let's create something out of this. So let's just write a simple query for this. Okay, so there we go. We have everything running well. Now let's check this. So let's go over here for GraphQL. So that's our API endpoint, and there we go. So this was from my previous testing. So let's remove all this from here. And now here, what we need to do is we need to test for the mutation. So here I'm going to say, okay, mutation. And what mutation I'm checking it for? So I'm checking it for create user, because that's the name of the mutation over here. So here I'm going to say create user. So that's the mutation. And this mutation will take certain parameters. So the first parameter will be first name. That's going to be, let's say, Aditya. Then it will take last name. That's going to be, let's say, Kadam. Okay. And what I want from this data, like this request to like this, after it's registered, what I want to get it out of it. So in that case, I'm going to ask for ID and I will ask for, let's say, first name only. Now, if we run this, let's see what do we get. Okay, user or to output type but got undefined. Okay, so something is wrong in our output user definitions. So GraphQL list be like this. So type GraphQL list. There we go. Then this should solve our problem. There we go. And let's try this. Okay, we need to define query for this. Okay, let's define a query here. So here I'm gonna say same thing, like first we will need the user type, because that will be the set of details or set of keys that we could send back. So here I'm going to write first function for the query, that will be get user. So const get user. This will be just same thing. It will be of type user type. Arguments, what arguments I can have? I will just have an ID. Based on the ID, I will get the user. So let's get in these things. So GraphQL int user type, and then the resolve function. And here we can put a comma, and here we can first await to connect, and then we will have user find by ID. Let's get this model as well, user model, and we just return the user. Okay, and let's export this. So module dot exports, and we can export this get user, and then we can go to index.js, get the user queries. and just spread them over here. Okay, so now let's try this out. Let's refresh this. There we go. And let's create a user data, and there we go. So we got an error because we didn't pass the password. So in this case, we also need to pass the password. So let's pass the password here. Let's say 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. And what else? Email, we need it. So email, but like for bcrypt it throw an error. I'm sure it for email it won't throw an error because it just like it's just a string. It could be a null as well, but we can make it not null by surrounding this into GraphQL not null. So let me show you what do I mean. So something like this. So let's say I don't pass email in this, and then I can get from here GraphQL not null, non-null, this one, and to this I can pass let's say for email I pass something like this. So it's gonna be this one, and if we refresh this, we need to provide the email as well over here. So it's just gonna throw an error like that. So in this case, we can provide the email. So we could say email. That's gonna be aditya@example.com. Now if we run this, there we go. We get the user with ID 3 and the first name is Aditya. So we just received the user. Now in this case, let's say we write the query. So let's remove this and write the query. Now the query will be get user by ID. So sorry, get user. Now here we need to pass the ID. So ID will be, let's say 3, because that's the user we have in the database. And from this I need ID. I need first name for now. Now if I run this, you'll see I get this, but I also need the email, let's say. So if I run this, there you go, we also get the email. Now what if I also want the to-dos? So in that case I could say to-dos, and now this is going to be a schema again. So in this case I need to say what do I want. So I want the ID from the to-do and I want the title. Now if I send this, it will send me null, because ideally from our query, if I go to our query, we are not including that to-do. So we just need to put here something like this, include to-dos, and then if we send the query, so now it sent me the blank array because we don't have actually to-dos associated with it. But if we just create a random to-do, let's say over here I create a to-do like say XYZ, title with description, let's do it. And let's say this will be 2022, let's say 11/28, and also we have the same thing 2022 11/28, and here let's give it for ID user of ID 3. So if I create it with MySQL Workbench for now and send this, you'll see we'll get the ID and title. If I want to know the created at, then I can just ask for that and it will give me whatever the created at is. Sorry, it should be created at like this. Yeah, it should be created at like this. We refresh this and there we go. And if we ask for this, there we go. So we get the timestamp as well. So this is how you can request what you want, and like if you don't want certain things, you can then just omit it from your API request like this. So in a way, you don't have to generally change anything or write a separate API for specific details that you are asking for. So this is for the user. Now let's try to create something for to-dos. So here we'll create again. Then here let's create our another file which will be mutations. So let's create here just a mutation to create a to-do and also delete a to-do. So here I'll be writing const. So this we will need it, and then we will need const to-do type, and then here we will need connect, and here we will need to-do model, and let's create to-do our first one. So this will be having name of create to-do, type will be to-do, arguments name is not required actually for the function, you can simply go for args. So it's going to be title will be a GraphQL string, description of GraphQL string, then we will have the resolve function to resolve it. So it's going to await and then just create the to-do, and we'll also need the user ID. So user ID, this cannot be null, It's going to be of int. So we need to send some user ID. So GraphQL int. There we go. And then we can return the to do. Here we can update the to do as well. Const update to do. So this will be here. We can get in the type. It's going to be the same thing. Going to be ID of the to do. Then we will need the title, the description, whatever it's being asking for. And then we will need a resolve function. We will need to connect. We need to update the to do where ID is this, and should be fine. Okay. Now here the problem is, like, if the title is blank, then it will become blank as well. So we also need to omit the blank field. So just remember, like, we have a logic to filter the blank values because we don't want our title or description to be blank. In case if you want it blank, you can leave this logic. I won't write the logic. It's very simple. Like, you just need to iterate over the object. Whichever you find the keys, they are null. You just remove those keys and create a new object out of it. Then update the to do, and we have const delete to do type as well, arguments. It's going to be just the ID. Then we will have the resolve function. I feel like most of the time it's just a copilot with just a job for me. I just keep on pressing tap tap tap. Okay, so in this case, one thing I need to put here is I cannot send the to do because it's already deleted. So it's going to be of type GraphQL string, and we can send the message to do deleted successfully. Okay, now next thing is, okay, we need to export this. So create to do, update to do, delete to do. Okay, now let's bring this back to our index.js. So index.js, here we need to put those mutations as well. So to do mutations, we can put it over here. So const to do mutations coming from GraphQL to do's, and we can spread them over here like this. So to do mutations. Okay, now query. Let's go to do query. So in this case, we have our to do's. Then we can go inside the query. So here we can get const get all to do's. This will be again of type GraphQL list of to do type because it's going to be all to do's. So you can need to include this. And then here we will need the resolve function. This will just return all the to do's including the user. So we need to put the relationship on our model over here because currently we don't have it. So I go here, I need to put the relationship something like to do dot belongs to a user, and then there we go. And then we can go back to our query. Then it will include the user for that to do, and then if we need it, we can ask for the users as well. Next we will need module.exports get all to do's. Now we just need one more to get a specific to do. So const get to do. This will be again a function type to do. Arguments will be ID, and then we will just have connect to do, include user, return the to do. Perfect. This we are missing for the bracket, and now we need to include this. Oops. Add this over here, get to do. This goes inside our index.js over here. So we need to get the to do query. So const to do query, and then we can put the to do query over here. So to do query, there we go. And this completes our overall GraphQL API. Now let's give it a try by getting a user. You can also write multiple queries like this. So here I could say, let's refresh this so that we can have access to those queries. We are having a problem. It says call with something that's not a sequelize.model. Okay, this is happening because of certain things over here. It's just the hierarchy of the file. So if I go to do model belongs to do this, let's remove this from here and let's define the relationship in input.index.js. So it will be easy over there. So let's remove this from here. Let's remove this from here. It just happens sometimes because of the hierarchy. Like, strange, I know, it's just certain things. Not do, and let's put this below over here. There we go. Let's give this a try, and you'll see it works. So strange, just the hierarchy, but yeah. Okay, so now let's give this a try. So we can have multiple, I would say, queries as well. So we have one for get user. Let's have one for get to do. So here I could say I want a to do with ID 1, and here I want the title of the to do. So let's see what do we get. So here you'll see we have okay, to do is not defined somewhere, so maybe it must be in the query. Yes, I didn't include to do. Okay, let's import this. There we go. Now let's give this a try, and there we go. We can have like multiple queries and it works fine. So let's try to delete a to do. There we go. So let's try this, and there we go. To do deleted successfully. Now if we try to write the query for to do, so query again, and this time if we query the to do, get to do with ID 1, let's see what do we get. So we want the ID of this to do, we'll get null because the to do doesn't exist. So that works as well. So that's all in this video. Hope you enjoy this video. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you feel this video is worth sharing with your network, please do share with your network. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel. So see you in the next video. Till the next time, goodbye.